Hello, my name's Toby Thompson from Cranfield. I'm here with Chris Chant, Commercial Director at Detica Limited. Chris, we're talking about risk management, but as a commercial director, what have you got to say about risk management? Why are the two related?
In any engagement between a buyer and a seller, there's risks on both sides, things that might go wrong during the project. And the role of a commercial director on the supply side, which is where my role is to help the organisation assess the totality of the risk, which might be a delivery risk, it might be a financial risk, it might be a reputational risk, and to balance that with actually securing the business.
So you're protecting both sides. You're protecting your organisation and the client's organisation.
Yes, it is both sides, and the traditional role of a commercial director is to kind of say no if we're not careful. But clearly in more modern engagements, the idea is to get both parties, which is our organisation and the client's organisation, to understand that sometimes you can't mitigate all the risk to zero before you start the contract.
But if I'm a client, I want to give the risk to you. You're a risk manager, let's say, and I want to get it off my books, and I want comfort around that. It doesn't seem very comfortable what you're putting forward there.
Yeah, I think that's potentially a romantic notion from the client's point of view, that by enacting a contract, all the risk disappears. If I'm a government agency, which is our clients typically, and I contract out for a piece of work and it goes wrong, actually I'm the one who's hurting because I am the buyer at the end of the day. So therefore the objective is to come up with constructs where risk can be managed within the project such that the client gets what they need for their business, as opposed to just meeting potentially a set of requirements that we achieve.
So you seem to be doing more than just managing risk or project managing, or maybe even commercial directing. There seems to be a relationship component to that.
Yes, and that's not me personally. That's, within the ethics of the organisation to a large extent. Some organisations are more traditional, and they may just hit the set of requirements that the client gives them. Detica is a different kind of organisation, coming from a consulting background, so therefore the emphasis that we put into our bids is to try and understand what the client wants, and that's just endemic within the organisation. And from that base we can then actually get a much more stronger relationship with the client, a trust relationship, such that we can actually manage the risk jointly between us during the project in a real sense, not just a PowerPoint sense, if I may put it that way.
But you can't just turn risk on. Surely there seems to be a large and long build-up to this process of people, the company, a client, engaging with you. How's that? Can you explain that process?
Yeah, so for our business, we have long-term relationships with several government agencies. So whilst our staff may turn over and change, the organisations have been dealing together for many years. As a result of that, the level of trust between the two organisations is quite strong. We understand our client's business and our client trusts our capabilities. So therefore we're able to build slightly more different commercial constructs with our client than if we'd never met before. So therefore I do think it's necessary for the buyer and the seller in this instance to have a slightly longer term relationship than just, well, I've chosen you as the best of the bunch in a competition.
So it's a slower buy by the sound of it.
Yes, I think it can be done, because if there was a long-term procurement, if it was a large programme, some procurements take many years, then there's an opportunity during that process, assuming the client manages the procurement process in that way, to build that trust. Because in order for me as a seller, if you like, to demonstrate to you as a buyer that I'm capable of offering a solution to you in a different way than perhaps you imagined at the beginning, I could show evidence of that based on what I've done for previous clients, which you could do due diligence on.
But what if I wanted more comfort from you? I was intrigued, let's say, by your approach, but I wanted that single number or the fact that you're going to manage this for me. What comfort is there? There sounds to be no comfort at all, other than I've got to engage with you more than perhaps I wanted to.
Yes, that's true. We could start in a small way, yes, so therefore you could contract with us for some small pieces of work where we could demonstrate this way of doing work. Because that's what we're doing here. We're talking about a different way of contracting. And if you were worried about doing it for a large procurement, then you could do it for a much smaller, perhaps less risky for yourself procurement, where you'd see this particular way of working.
Why is this risk management? It sounds like a consultancy model.
It is a consultancy model, but it's a recognition of the fact that in an environment, in any environment, risk is endemic. You can't stop risk. So therefore the idea that you can start a procurement for something that is quite complicated, and at the beginning of that contract identify all the risks, put them against requirements, get the supplier to cost them, and it'll all go perfectly. I think there's enough examples to show that that typically has a relatively high failure rate if we're not careful. So what Detica has done is, on a particular set of client engagements, has developed a methodology, specifically around software products, but I can't see why it couldn't be applicable to other kinds of product solutions or even services, where we manage the risk jointly during the project.
It sounds as though it's more commercially oriented. What's the point of contact for you in terms of this process? Are you dealing with your OPPO inside of your client organization? Are you looking downwards inside your organization delivering this material? Where's your focus?
So my personal focus is that where we wish to engage with a client, they're clearly need to contract. And the typical contract is a 5-year contract for delivering a thing against a set of hundreds of requirements. So there's an exercise at the beginning of that process prior to contract where I work with the team to help the client articulate with us in a set of contract-ready documents the way that we will do the work. So that's essentially evidencing in the contract the methodology that will be adopted during the project. Once we've signed the contract, actually my role disappears, because this kind of project minimizes the amount of change note activity. And the reason is that in a normal contract where you're aiming for a set of requirements at the end of the job, and change happens externally, ideas change with the client, then the only way of typically coping with that is with the change note methodology. Whereas in an organizational construct where the change is managed jointly between the buyer and the seller, at the end of each piece of the small delivery activity, buyer and seller can then say, okay, I'd like to change the next phase of the contract, and we carry on and do it. So there's a fundamental difference between a contract which is a single number for a term against a set of requirements versus what we do with this particular client, which is a framework contract. And at the beginning of that contract, there is no work. We then propose work in a series of task orders, which may run concurrently, and each have different levels of maturity, and we manage that through the process.
It sounds a very educative thing. It seems like you need to educate your client into a different way of thinking slightly to engage with you.
If they've not done it before, that's true.
And why would you think this is a better approach than maybe the traditional approach that people watching this video may have in mind?
I think the main answer to that is that one gets a better business result for the client, because even though there is a set of requirements, in order for us to make this process work, we need to see behind the requirements what's happening. And as a process, we can both jointly change those requirements during the project. So it's not an adversarial change to each of the requirements. It is a mutual change to look at an individual requirement and say, actually, it would be better for this requirement to change. And it doesn't cost anything to the client. There's no loss of face or financial loss if there is a requirement change.
It sounds suspiciously costly in terms of the relationship. They need to put more into it than perhaps they were willing to before with the traditional arrangements.
I would suggest less, because they're less worried and less administrative burden about change note management, which is a significant amount of effort on any large fixed time project. Whereas if you have an environment where both parties can review changes to the project and very quickly make changes to the requirements ongoing, it's less of a trauma to make changes to the project.
This sounds like a sea change in risk management. Chris Chant, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you.